Mr. HOUSHANG SEYHOUN, my professor and the dean of the School of Architecture in Iran for many years. He passed 2 days ago and brought a great sadness to the hearts of all the students, which they all loved him. His role in education and in architecture, in terms of introduction of contemporary or modern architecture to Iran, and the services he has done to the culture and to preservation of the historic buildings, which are the legacy of this great heritage, the rich heritage of Iranian architecture. These services he has done are to be mentioned now that he has gone. In terms of his architecture, as you know, he's the architect of a few prominent national monuments in Iran. First of them being the mausoleum of Sina in Hamida. He won this project in a competition. And there's an interesting story. In fact, his architecture, his education, his life is tightly connected with Beaux-Arts. Because the School of Architecture that he went to was established by a group of, I should say, mostly by a French architect and archaeologist, André Godard. And he was the head of school when he studied there. And when he won this competition on Mausoleum of Sina, he was reluctant to accept the scholarship that came to him after the war, when General de Gaulle had brought a series of scholarships for the foreign talented students to come and spread the culture of France on their return. When he brought his concern about the fact that if he leaves Iran, he may lose the chance of executing his project for this monument, André Godard told him, "You should go, and I will let you know when the budget is ready, because they don't have the money now." So Seyhoun left for Beaux-Arts. It was the years after the war. There was rationing in food, and but he had a great time during his stay in Beaux-Arts. The interesting thing that happened, and he used to tell me this story with a great kind of enjoyment. He, with great pleasure, he was directed by the registrar of Beaux-Arts to go to the first year. And he refused going to the first year. So he never drew any projects or anything about the classes of the first premier cycle, which was the first group of studies, because he told the guy, I'm an architect, I'm a graduate, I should not sit on the first stages of study. But nobody was listening. So a concours came, a competition came. I think it was the Concours Américain. And in that concours competition, all the students of France could enter, all the schools of architecture, and all the students. So he had a chance to draw that project. And he was one of the seven entries that were accepted. When he was accepted, he took the letter and went to the office of the registrar and showed him the letter and said, you see, this is what I meant. He told him to go to the second cycle, which is the kind of like masters. He started there the way he wanted. But from the very first year, he came to Atelier Zabaroni in Beaux-Arts. He started to help students with their work, and he became quite famous in rendering and in drawing because he had a great skill anyway. He was mostly an artist more than an architect. And he used to make, he could see beauty in every material and every means of, creating beauty. He has done a few monuments, but the significance of what he did, which started with Bou Ali, Sina, was that it was the first time that somebody, an architect, because the other architects before him in the period of modernization of Iran, some architects had started, like Taherzadeh, Behzad, or Markov, to look at the traditional and historic buildings of Iran. But they used to take a motif or a column or a piece of ceramic work and put it on the building, and they thought it has become Iranian. But Seyhoun approached it in completely new way. The monument of Gumbad Qaboos, which was a monument of the dynasty who were in the same time as Sina, became a subject for him to stylize it and present it in the mausoleum in a very refined and minimalist way, in a language of modern architecture. And by this action, by this design and this building, which was built afterwards, for example, it was in fair-faced concrete, it was in bush-hammered concrete. And these were all new items. By the way, he loved Auguste Perret. He praised Auguste Perret amazingly. And he told me, if you go to Paris, you should see this, this, and this. These are Auguste Perret's work, including that bank, which is really a nice work, and many others. So he was really the first one who used exposed concrete in buildings and in this monument. That means he used the language of the architecture of our time. And by this way, he showed to the rest of the architects after him how they can, first of all, that Iranian architecture is something to look at. They should not just look at the West, the way it was then, that everybody was looking at Europe for every solution to every question. He said, no, you have other resources in your heritage here. Why don't you look at that? And it started with this monument. So, and afterwards, when he was the head of the school, he used to take the students to long trips to all villages and all cities of Iran, and encouraged all the students to sketch like he used to do. He was a great croquis person. And croquis really was started in the School of Architecture in Iran by Seyhoun. And this tradition of drawing from buildings and nature is still practiced in the schools of Iran, or architectural schools of Iran, after so many years. There are significant elements or areas of service to the education. When he was the head of school, he added the School of Music, he added the School of Theater, he added the School of Urban Planning. They were all added in the School of Fine Arts when Seyhoun was the head of the school. And he was active in conservation and preservation and repair of old buildings. I was with him many times that he visited these buildings with another group of the ministry to find solutions for them not to collapse in earthquake and how to repair different parts. So he was a man who was, in every moment of his life, he was either adding to his information about art and architecture and everything in the world, or he was drawing, or he was painting, or he was teaching, or he was involved in protection of old buildings and serving in the area of protection of the heritage of the country. He was a member of ICOMOS, which was quite a prestigious role. And there are many areas I just briefly talk about. I'm very glad to have a chance to talk to Beaux-Arts students, according to Sina. Reason being that his life was really interwoven with Beaux-Arts. He used to talk about Beaux-Arts all the time, about the funny kind of moments he had with the students, the amazing, there was limitless stories that he used to say and laugh. He had really enjoyed his time there. When Godard told Seyhoun that the money is there, he made the Sina Mausoleum his projet de diplôme. And he finished it very fast and came back with his projet, and then this project was built, which is what you see now. And then it continued with the Mausoleum of Khayyam, Omar Khayyam, and Kamal al-Noor, and Nader Shah. Amazing. For example, in Nader, he was a great fan of pure material use, no kind of cladding or covering. You should see the actual material. And in his small building of his office in Tehran that he built, he used structural beams, steel beams, and huge pieces of stone in between them. In Nader Shah, he used the stone in many different ways, all granite carved in different ways. And he was very much fond of geometry and terrasse régulateur, or golden sections. Used to use it in their work, in his work, and used to talk about it to us. And the geometry in all of these buildings, especially Omar Khayyam and Nader, the columns and everything, is an evidence of what I'm talking about. It's a witness of the fact that he had a great imagination about geometry. Like most old architects or masons of Iran who did these great mosques with the domes and interwoven rasmi sazi or mughalaskari, or all of these great geometry you find in the traditional architecture of Iran. It is amazing how these people manage to build these amazing shapes. And he too has inherited this talent. And he had a lot of information about Iranian culture and architecture and history. The same he had about the Western culture and history. He was very interested in Western music. He was from a family of great traditional Persian musicians. His grandfather was a great person who organized the radifs, or the main modes of the Persian music. However, his interest was more in music of the West. He loved Beethoven, and he used to have kind of very special relationship with people, especially his students. He used to make fun of different things to create an atmosphere of laughter and interest. For example, he used to insist that Beethoven is the best musician and composer. And the students, some of them, they used to say no. He used to have this kind of teasing. However, he was very serious in his work with the students. But he let them make some funny, teasing kind of episodes with him. And one of the students would say, no, it is Mozart, it's not Beethoven. And they used to try to win it from him. And their greatest kind of pride, this student, was that he found a piece of Mozart that was somehow used, or Beethoven who wrote something about Mozart in his work. And when he found that piece, he would bring it to him and say, you see, your great composer was the person who praised my Mozart. And it was this kind of struggle went on with the students. They all tried to do something to create fun, and there were millions of these stories in our trips, and we all remember him with great joy and pleasure all the time. Apart from the fact that he was a great man as an educator and an architect, he was a very interesting man in terms of creating a lot of situations which were very funny and made everybody quite close to him. His greatest sadness in the last days or months or years of his life, was that he was far from the country that he loved. And he really suffered because of being far from his own land.